Why there is no such thing as a dead genre. What do I mean by that? And is it possible for a genre not to be popular and have no one want to read it? Is it something you should avoid? Or can you go against the system and write whatever you want to write and be successful? We're going to be answering those questions and more, and we're starting right now. There's this idea that there are some genres that you should just avoid writing. Just like in Hollywood, how they believe that there are certain types of movies that should not be made anymore. You look at how many Western movies were made in the past. There were a million of them. Today, Hollywood does not make any Westerns because they believe that it is a dead genre. And same thing with musicals. There was a time when there were a ton of musicals being made. Today, very few, because Hollywood believes that it is a dead genre. Does the same thing apply to novels? And why is it that people believe that there are some genres that you need to avoid when writing a novel? The fact is, there's really no such thing as a dead genre. What happens, though, is you as a writer can come up with a brand new idea of a genre that has not been around. And what makes your book successful isn't because of the genre itself, it's because the reader connects with the characters. The genre just happens to be something that hasn't been used in a while. But no one reads books because of the genre. We connect with characters. And as long as you connect with the characters, that is what makes you want to turn the page. You didn't buy the book because of the genre. You bought it because of the characters within the story, within the genre. And all of a sudden, your book is successful. And now everybody believes that that genre is now back. It's back from the grave. But the problem is, now everyone ends up wanting to copy you. Now there are a flood of books on the market that are identical to your book. But the problem is that the characters are weak. The characters are flat, and there's too much of a focus on the genre, but the characters are meaningless. So those books don't sell. And all of a sudden, the book publishers get afraid, thinking, oh, that genre isn't selling because nobody cares. The fact is, it's not that the genre is what the public is avoiding. The public is avoiding bad written novels with dull, boring characters, to a point where the book publishers end up thinking it's the genre that the public was avoiding. But in fact, it was the dull characters. The reason why your book was successful was because you wrote about powerful, real characters dealing with real problems that just happened to be taking place in a genre that the book publishers believed wasn't successful. But then all of a sudden there's a flood of books with dull characters in that genre that don't sell, and the book publishers say, well, you see there, we proved that that genre doesn't sell. But it wasn't the genre, it was the weak characters. As a writer, you know that you're not going to focus on genres. As a writer, you want to focus on people. You want to focus on characters who we can relate to in whatever genre that is, be it a horror or a drama or science fiction. This is what characters want. There was a time back a few years ago where book publishers believed that kids no longer cared about reading, that books aimed towards young adults were it wasn't successful. It was pointless to write books for teenagers because it was believed that teenagers only cared about cell phones and video games. And books about boy wizards would never sell until all of a sudden J.K. Rowling came along and wrote Harry Potter. And everyone said, in the book publishing world, they said, that will never sell. You cannot get kids to start reading. It's pointless to write books for kids. And nobody cares about wizards. And then all of a sudden, J.K. Rowling wrote about Harry Potter, and it finally got published. And all of a sudden, there were millions of kids around the world now reading about a boy wizard. And this confused the book publishers, thinking, how could this happen? The fact is that the kids did not read about a boy wizard. What they cared about was Harry Potter. They cared about the characters who just happened to be a boy wizard. And as long as you write a book in which we care about the characters, The general public doesn't care about the genre. What they care about is the characters, and that is what sells the book. The problem is that after Harry Potter came out, there were a million ripoffs, all about being a wizard, spells, and castles. The problem is that the characters within the novel were dull and boring. We didn't care about any of these characters. The market was flooded because we see this happening a lot in the world of book publishing. When one book is successful, all of a sudden there's a million books out there that copy and rip off that successful book. The problem is that it's written so quickly that we don't care about the characters because they come across as being dull and fake, leaving the book publishers to think, well, no one cares anymore about the boys being a wizard. But the fact is, you can write a million books about wizards and castles and have it successful simply because you're focusing on character. There was a time when Clint Eastwood made the movie Unforgiven back in the 1990s, and it was a Western. This was a time when Hollywood was convinced that Westerns were done in Hollywood, that nobody cared about Westerns, until Clint Eastwood won an Oscar in Best Picture for Unforgiven. And this confused Hollywood, saying, how could the public care about a Western movie? The fact is, the public cared because they cared about the characters, and it just happened to be a Western. The public didn't go see it because it was a Western. They cared about the characters who were in a Western movie. As a writer, you want to make sure your characters are real and rich and powerful, making the reader connect with them. And the genre itself is secondary because we don't read for genres, we read for characters. Why did the movie The Exorcist do so well? Why did the book The Exorcist sell so well? Because it wasn't because the general public was obsessed with horror. They just liked a well-told story. And The Exorcist was a well-told story. We cared about the characters. We cared about their problems. How was the problem going to be resolved? And by us caring about the characters, we then wanted to read on. And a movie was made that was just as successful. And Hollywood then thought, well, the general public must love horror movies. So then they flooded the market with millions of bad horror movies, in which the focus was on the demon or the special effects. But what the focus wasn't on were the characters. The characters were dull and lifeless. And all of a sudden, those movies stopped doing well. And then Hollywood thought, well, the general public doesn't like horror movies. The fact is, the general public likes any type of movie, regardless of genre, because they like good, well-told stories with rich, powerful characters. But Hollywood seems to think that when a movie does well, just copy it and you'll make a lot of money. But the same thing happened with the Da Vinci Code. When Dan Brown wrote a thriller novel, there was a mystery. The market was then flooded with millions of Da Vinci Code ripoffs that were not as good because we didn't care about the characters or the problems they were facing. The, the novels were written so quickly that the characters were weak and dull and boring. So then Hollywood and the book publishers gave up on thriller novels, thinking the public got tired of them. The public didn't get tired. What they got tired of was just bad ripoffs with dull characters. As a novel writer, you can write about anything you want as long as you create characters who are rich, powerful, real, and compelling. And when you do that, the reader will connect with the protagonist, see themselves as a protagonist, and want to read to the end to find how the novel is going to finish. But if the characters are weak and dull, and all you're doing is ripping off other successful novels, the public will be bored. They won't want to see how this problem solves itself, so they'll just stop reading. If you have an idea for a genre that isn't popular right now, don't put aside your book thinking it will never sell. In fact, you might be the one who brings back that dead genre. All of a sudden, your book gets released, just like how J.K. Rowling released her book, and all of a sudden it opened up the world to getting young people to read again and getting characters to read about wizards, something that book publishers never thought possible. Your book might be that next book, a book that brings back a dead genre, not because the public cares about the genre, but because you have written about real powerful characters who the reader cares about, and it just happens to take place in a genre that isn't really popular right now. But your book might in fact open up the floodgates to having a whole bunch of books written in that genre that book publishers thought was dead. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website, where I have a tremendous number of blogs that will help you become the greatest writer you can be. In fact, I'm going to leave a link in the description down below, and you can click on it right now and go to my website and start learning. And if you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my next video on how fame and money never got to Stephen King. How is this possible? And how can you learn from this to become a better writer? Well, I'm going to leave a link to that video right here, and you can click on it right now and start watching and learning.